The rain lashed against the towering spires of Buckingham Palace, its rhythmic drumming against the glass windows eerily mimicking the escalating storm brewing within the royal family. Inside the gilded corridors of one of the world's most famous residences, tension crackled like electricity in the air. The world had been watching closely, waiting for King Charles to respond to Meghan Markle's latest request, a request that many deemed audacious, if not outright defiant. But what came next wasn't just a simple denial. It was something far more severe, a move that would shake the very foundation of the Sussexes' ambitions. To understand how things reached this boiling point, one must step back into the intricate web of royal traditions, power struggles, and the deep scars left behind by Meghan and Harry's dramatic exit from royal life. From the moment the Duke and Duchess of Sussex stepped away from their senior royal duties in early 2020, they had been embroiled in an ongoing tug-of-war with the monarchy. Their explosive interviews, high-profile deals, and carefully crafted public image had created a narrative of two people determined to carve out a new identity outside the institution that had once defined them. But while they had traded the regal halls of the palace for the sun-drenched mansions of Montecito, California, there was one thing Meghan Markle had not relinquished: her deep desire for a royal title that carried weight and respect. Behind closed doors, discussions surrounding Meghan's title had been swirling for months. Palace aides whispered about the subtle yet persistent efforts made by Meghan's team to negotiate a return of certain royal privileges, particularly in the form of an official title. Some reports suggested that Meghan was lobbying for her children, Archie and Lilibet, to be given prince and princess status, something that had not been automatically granted due to their status as great-grandchildren of the reigning monarch. Others speculated that Meghan sought the reinstatement of her own HRH, Her Royal Highness, styling, a privilege she had relinquished alongside Harry when they stepped back from official duties. For King Charles, the issue was far more than just a matter of titles. It was a statement of power, tradition, and the future of the British monarchy. Since ascending to the throne, Charles had made it clear that he envisioned a streamlined, modernized monarchy, one that would be focused on duty rather than celebrity. Meghan's request, if granted, would set a precedent that could unravel the very boundaries he had fought to maintain. If an individual who had consciously stepped away from royal life could reclaim privileges at will, what did that say about the sanctity of royal traditions? Inside palace walls, advisors were divided. Some argued that denying Meghan outright would only add fuel to the already raging fire of controversy. With public opinion on the monarchy still fragile in the wake of Queen Elizabeth's passing, there were concerns that another public fallout with the Sussexes would further tarnish the royal family's reputation. Others, however, saw no other option. Granting Meghan her requested title could be perceived as rewarding disloyalty, a move that could undermine King Charles's authority as a decisive and forward-thinking monarch. While these debates continued behind the scenes, Meghan and Harry's team had been laying the groundwork for a counter-narrative. Sources close to the couple hinted that they were prepared to release statements emphasizing Meghan's continued commitment to charity work and global initiatives. Some speculated that they might frame the denial as another example of the royal family's unwillingness to embrace progress and inclusivity. The battle lines were being drawn, and it was only a matter of time before the world witnessed the next chapter of this royal saga unfold. Then came the moment that would send shockwaves across the globe. King Charles had made his decision. The response was not just a denial. It was a final, unyielding declaration that Meghan's status within the royal fold was permanently severed. There would be no negotiations, no softening of the decision, no room for reinterpretation. Furthermore, Charles's ruling was accompanied by a series of measures that would ensure Meghan and Harry would feel the weight of their choices in a way they had never expected. As news of the decision broke, reactions varied dramatically. In the United Kingdom, supporters of the monarchy viewed Charles's move as a long-overdue stand against the Sussexes' perceived entitlement. In the United States, where Meghan had cultivated a strong base of sympathizers, the decision was met with outrage. Pundits dissected every aspect of the announcement, speculating on the Sussexes' next move and whether this would be the final nail in the coffin of any future reconciliation. But one thing was certain: Meghan had reached for power and influence within the royal framework, and King Charles had answered in a way that left no room for doubt. The monarchy had spoken, and the consequences would be irreversible. The stage was set for a dramatic fallout, one that would define the next chapter of the ongoing war between tradition and modern ambition. As the fallout from King Charles's decision reverberated across media outlets and social discussions, the details of Meghan Markle's title demands began to take center stage. The world wanted to know exactly what she had requested, why it had been denied, and what this meant for the broader future of the royal family. What seemed like a straightforward matter of titles was, in reality, a complex, multi-layered issue steeped in history, protocol, and an unspoken struggle for influence. At the heart of Meghan's request was the issue of her children's royal titles. When Archie and Lilibet were born, their status as great-grandchildren of the Queen meant that they did not automatically receive prince and princess designations. According to rules established by King George V in 1917, only children of the sovereign, grandchildren of the sovereign in the direct male line, and the eldest son of the Prince of Wales were entitled to such titles. When Queen Elizabeth passed away and King Charles ascended the throne, Archie and Lilibet technically became eligible, yet no immediate announcement was made regarding the official conferral of these titles. Reports suggested that Meghan had pushed for a formal declaration that her children would be recognized as prince and princess. Some insiders claimed that she felt this was not just a matter of tradition, but of dignity and respect. Given the scrutiny her family had faced, she allegedly believed that denying her children royal titles would be a way for the institution to further distance itself from her and Harry. On the surface, this may have appeared to be a reasonable request. After all, Prince William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, bore their royal titles from birth, reinforcing the idea that status within the monarchy was a carefully maintained hierarchy. However, the decision to grant or deny titles extended beyond historical precedent. King Charles had long been an advocate for a slimmed-down monarchy, one that would focus on the direct line of succession rather than extending privileges to extended family members. With this vision in mind, bestowing prince and princess titles upon Archie and Lilibet would set a precedent that Charles was seemingly unwilling to uphold. The optics of rewarding individuals who had actively distanced themselves from the institution posed a significant problem. Could a family that had renounced royal duties still expect to benefit from the titles and prestige associated with the monarchy? Further complicating matters was the issue of Meghan's personal title. Upon marrying Prince Harry, she had been granted the title of the Duchess of Sussex, a position steeped in history but without direct political influence. When she and Harry made the decision to step back from their roles as senior working royals, one of the most significant consequences was the loss of their HRH styling. While they retained their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles, they were no longer permitted to use the designation of His Royal Highness or Her Royal Highness. This was a distinction that set them apart from working members of the royal family, serving as a constant reminder of the divide between them and the institution they had left behind. Sources close to the palace suggested that Meghan's latest request included a bid to have her HRH styling reinstated. This request, if true, would have been particularly contentious, as it would not only contradict the terms of the Sussex's exit agreement, but would also challenge the very framework of how royal titles are granted and revoked. It was widely understood that HRH status was tied to duty, something that Meghan and Harry had willingly relinquished. To restore it would imply that one could simply opt in and out of royal status at will, a notion that directly conflicted with the monarchy's carefully maintained traditions. But Meghan's push for these titles was not just a matter of formality. Titles come with implications, both in terms of public perception and legal standing. In a world where branding and status play a critical role, the ability to use an HRH title could open doors, influence negotiations, and solidify a position of authority in global discussions. This was not lost on King Charles or his advisors, who understood the long-term ramifications of allowing such a move to proceed unchallenged. Another critical aspect that reportedly played into the decision was the precedent set by previous royal family members who had lost their HRH status. The most notable case was that of Diana, Princess of Wales, who was stripped of her HRH designation following her divorce from Prince Charles. Despite being the mother of the future king, Diana was no longer considered an official member of the royal family in the same way working royals were. If Diana herself had been subject to such strict protocol, the argument went, why should Meghan, who had voluntarily distanced herself from the institution, be granted an exception? Further comparisons were drawn to Prince Andrew's daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Despite being grandchildren of the late Queen Elizabeth, neither were given working royal roles, and their HRH status did not grant them a significant public platform within the monarchy. Even Prince Andrew, following his widely publicized scandals, had been stripped of his HRH status. If a blood prince had lost his title, the logic held, then Meghan's claim had little merit. King Charles's decision to deny these requests was not made lightly. The optics of the situation required careful handling, as it was certain to provoke strong reactions from both supporters and critics of the royal family. A misstep could fuel further narratives of exclusion and mistreatment, particularly among Meghan's loyal followers. For this reason, the palace's approach was measured, deliberate, and final. There would be no reinstatement of HRH for Meghan, no special exemptions for Archie and Lilibet beyond what was already outlined in royal tradition, and no indication that the door would ever be open for renegotiation. The denial was swift, but the impact was far-reaching. As soon as the decision became public, the media response was immediate and intense. Royal experts dissected every angle, debating the significance of the rejection and what it meant for the future relationship between the Sussexes and the monarchy. Some hailed the decision as a necessary step in reaffirming the authority of the crown, reinforcing the idea that royal privileges must be earned through duty rather than demanded as entitlements. Others, however, saw it as another chapter in what they perceived as the ongoing marginalization of Meghan and Harry. In the hours following the announcement, social media erupted in discussions. Supporters of Meghan and Harry expressed outrage, viewing the denial as further proof of the institution's reluctance to embrace progress and diversity. Conversely, royal traditionalists praised King Charles for upholding the sanctity of royal protocols and refusing to yield to pressure. The divide was stark, and it was clear that this decision had not only reinforced existing tensions, but had also cemented the lines of battle between supporters and detractors. But the biggest question remained: what would Meghan and Harry do next? With their title ambitions thwarted and their status within the royal fold firmly dismissed, their response would be crucial in shaping the narrative moving forward. Would they take the high road, accepting the decision with quiet dignity? Or would they push back, using their powerful media presence to challenge the ruling and ignite another firestorm? One thing was certain: the battle over titles had revealed deeper fractures, not just between Meghan and the monarchy, but within the very structure of the royal institution itself. And as history had shown time and time again, in the world of royalty, nothing remained static for long. The denial of Meghan Markle's title request was not just a simple rejection. It was a defining moment in King Charles's reign. It sent a clear message that the monarchy was no longer willing to bend to the Sussexes' demands, no matter how much public pressure was placed on the institution. But while the decision was firm, the palace's response did not end there. The immediate aftermath saw a carefully orchestrated series of moves by King Charles and his inner circle to ensure that this moment would not only close the door on Meghan's ambitions, but also reinforce the royal family's authority in a way that left no room for future negotiation. The official denial was communicated through traditional royal channels, with palace insiders briefing select journalists before the story was made public. Unlike the Sussexes, who often turned to high-profile interviews and personal statements to control the narrative, the monarchy functioned through a more calculated system. This meant that by the time the news broke, key royal commentators already had their talking points lined up, reinforcing the decision with historical context and precedent. This approach ensured that rather than appearing as a reactive move, the rejection of Meghan's request was framed as a continuation of the royal family's long-standing commitment to duty over privilege. But what many did not anticipate was the extent of King Charles's resolve. The rejection was only the beginning. In a move that would shake the Sussexes' public standing even further, Charles's response came with a secondary, more severe consequence, one that went beyond titles and entered the realm of tangible repercussions. One of the first decisions made in the wake of Meghan's denied request was a further distancing of the Sussexes from the monarchy's core functions. While they had already been removed from official royal duties, there had been lingering questions about their remaining affiliations. Some of these questions centered around their patronages and royal connections, which, despite their exit, had continued to provide them with a degree of legitimacy. Charles, fully aware that symbolic ties to the monarchy were being leveraged by the Sussexes for credibility, ordered a reassessment of all remaining associations connected to the couple. This review led to an announcement that Meghan and Harry would no longer be allowed to retain any ceremonial or honorary military appointments, something that had been a source of pride for Harry in particular. Stripping away these roles was a clear indication that there was no path back into the royal fold, not even in a symbolic or honorary capacity. The message was clear: one could not selectively participate in the monarchy. It was an all-or-nothing institution, and the Sussexes had made their choice. Another element of the fallout was the decision to remove the couple's names from official royal communications. While they had been distanced from the working family, their names were still occasionally mentioned in royal documents and public references. Charles's new directive ensured that any remaining references to the Sussexes in official materials would be significantly reduced, making it clear that they were no longer part of the monarchy's active representation. This was a subtle but powerful move, reinforcing their status as outsiders without explicitly severing legal ties. Beyond internal actions, Charles's decision to stand firm against Meghan's title request had wider implications for the public's perception of the monarchy. The move was widely interpreted as a sign of his commitment to preserving tradition and stability, particularly at a time when many questioned the relevance of the institution. By taking a definitive stand, Charles reinforced the idea that the monarchy would not be swayed by external pressures or media campaigns, a stark contrast to the Sussexes' approach of using public opinion as a tool for leverage. However, this approach also carried risks. The Sussexes, particularly Meghan, had cultivated a global image that framed them as figures of modernity and progressive values. In denying her request, Charles ran the risk of reinforcing the narrative that the monarchy was resistant to change, an argument that had gained traction in certain circles. This meant that the palace had to carefully navigate the fallout, ensuring that their decision was not perceived as an act of exclusion, but rather as a necessary step to uphold the monarchy's integrity. As expected, the Sussexes did not take the rejection quietly. Though they did not immediately release a formal statement, sources close to them quickly began to shape the conversation. Reports surfaced suggesting that Meghan had been deeply hurt by the decision, with some insiders claiming she felt personally targeted. Others hinted at frustration from Harry, who, despite his departure from royal life, still harbored a sense of connection to his heritage and lineage. Meanwhile, media figures sympathetic to the Sussexes began raising questions about whether the decision was influenced by personal tensions rather than purely institutional concerns. Some commentators speculated that Charles's ruling was not just about protocol, but also about long-standing friction between Meghan and the royal family. This speculation reignited discussions about past controversies, from the Sussexes' claims of mistreatment to allegations of racism within the institution. The discourse quickly became polarized, with some arguing that the decision was a justified consequence of the couple's actions, while others viewed it as a continuation of their perceived mistreatment. Public reaction was divided along familiar lines. In the United Kingdom, where royal traditions still carried weight, many saw Charles's decision as a necessary reinforcement of monarchy protocols. Royal watchers applauded the firm stance, noting that it signified a shift away from the perceived leniency of the past. Some even compared it to the firm actions taken by Queen Elizabeth in response to past royal controversies, drawing parallels to moments when she had to make difficult but necessary decisions to preserve the institution's stability. In the United States, where Meghan and Harry had established their new base, reactions were more mixed. Supporters of the couple framed the decision as another example of their unfair treatment, emphasizing the idea that Meghan had never been fully accepted within the royal fold. Some high-profile figures in media and entertainment openly criticized the move, suggesting that it reinforced outdated structures and exclusionary practices. However, There was also a growing faction that began questioning whether the Sussexes had overplayed their hand. Some commentators noted that by repeatedly positioning themselves as victims, they risked losing credibility, especially as public patience for ongoing royal drama began to wear thin. Despite the controversy, one thing was undeniable. The Sussexes had lost a significant battle in their ongoing struggle for royal legitimacy. While they had built a brand around their status as former royals, the denial of Meghan's title request and the subsequent measures taken by King Charles created a permanent wedge between them and the institution. No longer were they seen as semi-detached royals operating on their own terms. They were now firmly positioned as outsiders, with no route back to the privileges they once held. The ramifications of this decision extended beyond the immediate moment. Moving forward, Meghan and Harry would have to navigate a world where their royal ties were increasingly tenuous, forcing them to rely solely on their independent brand rather than the residual prestige of the monarchy. For King Charles, the move was a calculated assertion of authority, a demonstration that he was willing to make tough decisions to preserve the institution's integrity. But even as the dust began to settle, the question remained: how would Meghan and Harry respond? Would they seek a path of reconciliation, or would they escalate their public campaign against the monarchy? And perhaps most importantly, had King Charles's decision truly put an end to this chapter, or was it merely the beginning of an even bigger storm? As the weight of King Charles's decision settled over the royal family and the wider public, the immediate question became how Meghan and Harry would react. The rejection of Meghan's title request was not just a formal rebuff. It was a definitive closing of the door to any future negotiations regarding their royal status. The response from the Sussex camp was going to be crucial in shaping public perception, and many wondered whether they would choose a measured approach or escalate the situation into yet another public feud with the monarchy. The initial silence from Meghan and Harry was not unexpected. In previous controversies, they had often allowed the media narrative to build before making a calculated statement or appearing in a high-profile interview. This time was no different. As royal watchers and media outlets dissected the implications of the rejection, speculation grew about how the couple would respond behind the scenes. Some insiders suggested that Meghan had been blindsided by the firmness of Charles's stance, having believed that negotiations could still be possible. Others hinted that Harry had been caught between conflicting emotions, his loyalty to Meghan and his lingering ties to his family. Within days of the announcement, reports surfaced that Meghan had been deeply disappointed by the rejection, with sources close to her claiming that she felt the decision was not just about royal protocol, but also about her personal treatment by the institution. This narrative quickly gained traction, particularly among commentators sympathetic to the Sussexes, who framed the denial as another example of the monarchy refusing to modernize. Pundits and analysts debated whether Charles's decision was based purely on tradition or if it was a personal move designed to keep Meghan and Harry permanently at arm's length. However, while the Sussex camp maintained a degree of public restraint, media allies quickly began shaping the narrative on their behalf. Articles emerged suggesting that the rejection had reinforced Meghan's belief that she would never truly be accepted within the royal family. Some reports even went as far as to claim that Meghan saw the decision as an attempt to erase her and her children from the royal lineage altogether. While these claims were met with skepticism by royal experts, they succeeded in igniting fresh debates over whether the monarchy had mishandled the situation. Meanwhile, palace insiders were monitoring the Sussexes' next moves with caution. The royal family had long understood that public statements from Meghan and Harry had the potential to be damaging, and they were prepared for the possibility of another explosive interview or public statement. However, in a surprising turn, no official response came in the immediate aftermath of the decision. Instead, Meghan and Harry continued with their public engagements, focusing on their brand partnerships, charity work, and personal projects. Some saw this as a sign that they were choosing to move on rather than escalate the conflict, while others speculated that they were simply biding their time before launching a carefully crafted counterattack. Behind the scenes, however, the tension remained palpable. Those close to the situation suggested that Harry, in particular, was struggling with the finality of the rejection. While he had publicly embraced his new life outside the royal family, there were indications that he had held onto some hope of maintaining a connection to his heritage. The firm refusal of Meghan's title request signaled that any remaining ties were rapidly unraveling. For Harry, this was not just about titles. It was about his place in the family and the realization that the divide between him and his father had become almost irreparable. Meghan, on the other hand, was said to be focusing on the broader implications of the decision. From a branding perspective, her association with royalty had always been a key aspect of her public persona. The denial of her title request complicated the way she could position herself in the media. While she was still the Duchess of Sussex, the rejection of any further royal recognition created challenges in maintaining the level of influence she had sought. This meant recalibrating her public strategy, ensuring that her image remained powerful despite the firm stance of the monarchy. As the days passed, the conversation around the rejection began to evolve. While initial reactions had focused on the implications for Meghan and Harry, attention soon shifted to how this decision would impact the monarchy itself. Many royal commentators viewed Charles's move as a necessary step in reinforcing the monarchy's authority. By standing firm, he had demonstrated that royal privileges were not negotiable and that those who chose to step away from their duties could not selectively reclaim status when it suited them. This stance was seen as an effort to draw a clear distinction between the working royals who upheld the institution and those who had chosen a different path. However, the decision also had potential risks. The Sussexes still commanded significant media attention, particularly in the United States, where they had cultivated a loyal following. If they chose to retaliate, the monarchy could find itself once again embroiled in a damaging public relations battle. The palace was aware that any direct response from Meghan and Harry would reignite discussions about past grievances, potentially overshadowing the royal family's efforts to focus on their broader duties and responsibilities. In an effort to maintain control of the narrative, the royal household took a proactive approach. Senior aides ensured that trusted royal correspondents had access to carefully framed statements emphasizing that the decision was about structure and tradition, not personal vendettas. By reinforcing the idea that Charles's ruling was consistent with past royal protocol, the palace sought to prevent the story from being framed as an attack on Meghan specifically. Additionally, subtle efforts were made to highlight the role of Queen Camilla and Prince William in supporting the decision, presenting it as a collective move rather than an individual decree from the king. Meanwhile, public sentiment continued to be divided. While royal traditionalists applauded Charles's firm approach, critics pointed out that the monarchy risked appearing inflexible and disconnected from modern values. Some media outlets questioned whether the decision would further alienate younger generations who had grown increasingly indifferent to the monarchy. Others, however, saw it as a necessary step in preserving the institution's credibility, arguing that allowing Meghan to reclaim royal status would have weakened the monarchy's authority. As the controversy unfolded, one undeniable reality emerged. There was no longer any ambiguity about Meghan and Harry's position within the royal framework. The rejection of Meghan's title request was not just about a name or a status symbol. It was a final declaration that the Sussexes were outsiders, firmly separated from the core functions of the royal family. This decision marked a turning point in their relationship with the monarchy, solidifying a path that seemed increasingly irreversible. The broader implications of this moment extended beyond the personal tensions between Meghan, Harry, and the royal family. It raised fundamental questions about the future of the monarchy itself. Would Charles's firm stance set a precedent for how the institution handled challenges in the modern era, or would it be seen as an outdated resistance to change? Could the royal family continue to navigate the shifting landscape of public opinion while maintaining its traditional structure? And most importantly, would this decision truly close the chapter on Meghan and Harry's royal disputes, or was it merely setting the stage for the next battle? As the dust began to settle, one thing was clear: the fallout from this decision would be felt for years to come. The stage had been set for a new phase in the ongoing struggle between the monarchy and the Sussexes, a struggle that would continue to shape the public's perception of both parties. Whether this was the final act or just another turning point remained to be seen. But for now, King Charles had made his position known, and the world was watching to see what would happen next. As the fallout from King Charles's firm decision continued to unfold, it became increasingly evident that this moment was about more than just Meghan Markle's title request. It was about power, perception, and the broader dynamics at play within the royal family. For years, Meghan and Harry had positioned themselves as the outsiders who had escaped the rigid expectations of the monarchy, yet their repeated attempts to retain certain elements of their royal status suggested an ongoing struggle to remain connected to the institution they had walked away from. Now, with the door firmly shut, the reality of their position had never been clearer. The immediate consequences of the decision began to take shape in the weeks that followed. One of the most significant was the impact on Meghan and Harry's public image. For years, they had built their brand around their unique positioning as royals who had taken control of their own destiny, free from the constraints of tradition. However, this latest development challenged that narrative in a fundamental way. The denial of Meghan's request was a stark reminder that no matter how much influence they wielded in media and entertainment, they were still bound by the limitations imposed by the monarchy. It raised a crucial question. Could they continue to present themselves as figures of authority and prestige without the royal connection they had so often relied upon? This question was particularly relevant as the couple continued to navigate their careers in the United States. Since stepping away from their royal duties, Meghan and Harry had pursued numerous projects, from lucrative media deals to philanthropic initiatives. While some had been successful, others had faced challenges. Their Spotify deal had come to an abrupt end after just one season of Meghan's podcast, and their Netflix projects, though widely discussed, had not all achieved the expected level of success. Now, with their royal ties further diminished, there were growing concerns about the long-term sustainability of their brand. Meanwhile, King Charles's decision had reinforced his authority in a way that few had anticipated. Since taking the throne, Charles had faced scrutiny over whether he would be able to command the same level of respect and admiration as his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Some had questioned whether he would be too soft in handling the challenges facing the monarchy, particularly in relation to the ongoing drama with Meghan and Harry. But by standing firm on the issue of titles, Charles had demonstrated a level of decisiveness that left no doubt about his leadership. He had made it clear that the rules of the monarchy were not up for negotiation, even when faced with the potential backlash of denying a popular public figure. This move also signaled a broader shift in the royal family's approach to handling controversies. In the past, the monarchy had often taken a more passive stance, allowing time to diffuse tensions rather than engaging directly in public disputes. But with Charles at the helm, there appeared to be a new strategy, one that prioritized asserting control over the narrative rather than merely reacting to external pressures. This was evident in the way the palace had managed the announcement of Meghan's denied request. Rather than allowing speculation to dominate the conversation, they had ensured that royal experts and commentators had a clear, unified message to deliver to the public. This approach helped shape the way the decision was perceived, reinforcing the idea that it was about maintaining the integrity of the monarchy rather than targeting Meghan personally. Despite this, the backlash from Meghan's supporters remained significant. Social media was flooded with commentary from those who viewed the decision as an act of exclusion rather than one of principle. Many of Meghan's most vocal defenders argued that the move was indicative of a deeper resistance to change within the monarchy, pointing to past instances where royal traditions had been upheld despite widespread calls for modernization. Others framed it as a personal slight against Meghan, suggesting that she had been treated differently than other royal family members in similar situations. While these criticisms did not sway the palace's stance, they highlighted the ongoing divide between traditional royalists and those who believed the institution needed to evolve. One of the most closely watched aspects of the fallout was how the decision would impact Harry's relationship with his family. While the title request had been made on Meghan's behalf, its rejection had implications for Harry as well. He had already been at odds with his father and brother for years, with tensions escalating following the release of his memoir and various public statements about his experiences within the royal family. Now, with this latest rejection, the possibility of reconciliation seemed even more distant. Some reports suggested that Harry had hoped for a more nuanced resolution, one that would allow Meghan to retain some form of recognition without fully reinstating her royal status. But Charles's decision left no room for compromise. For Prince William, the decision was seen as a necessary step in protecting the monarchy's future. William had long been positioned as the modern face of the royal family, tasked with ensuring that the institution remained relevant to younger generations. However, he also understood the importance of maintaining the monarchy's traditions and safeguarding its reputation. Allowing Meghan to reclaim her title could have set a precedent that undermined the clear distinction between working royals and those who had chosen to step away. By supporting Charles's decision, William reinforced the idea that the monarchy had to operate on principles rather than personal relationships. The broader royal family remained largely silent on the issue, with no direct statements from senior members. This was in line with the traditional royal strategy of avoiding direct engagement in controversies. However, the lack of response did not mean a lack of awareness. Behind closed doors, discussions were undoubtedly taking place about how to navigate the aftermath of the decision and what it meant for the royal family's long-term strategy. Some insiders suggested that there were concerns about how this latest chapter would impact public perception, particularly among younger audiences who had shown growing disinterest in the monarchy. As the weeks passed, the immediate intensity of the controversy began to subside, but its implications remained. The decision had created a clear and irreversible divide between Meghan and the royal family, one that was unlikely to be mended anytime soon. It had also reinforced Charles's vision for a streamlined, more disciplined monarchy, one that did not bend to external pressures or personal grievances. For Meghan and Harry, the challenge now was to redefine their public image without the royal association they had once leaned on. Their next steps would be critical in determining whether they could successfully transition into a new phase of their careers or if the loss of their royal ties would ultimately weaken their influence. While the situation seemed to have reached a resolution, the nature of royal dynamics meant that the story was far from over. Meghan and Harry had built their public brand on their connection to the monarchy, and it was unlikely that they would fully step away from discussions about royal matters. Whether through interviews, documentaries, or carefully crafted public statements, the topic of their place within the royal family would continue to resurface. The question was no longer about whether Meghan would receive the title she sought. It was about how she and Harry would navigate their future in the absence of that recognition. As King Charles continued his reign, the decision to deny Meghan's title request would stand as a defining moment in his leadership. It was a declaration that the monarchy would not be dictated by external pressures or public opinion, but rather by the principles and traditions that had sustained it for centuries. Whether this approach would ultimately strengthen the institution or alienate segments of the public remained to be seen. But one thing was clear: the line had been drawn, and there was no turning back. As the public continued to digest the impact of King Charles's decision, the media landscape shifted into overdrive. Analysts and royal watchers dissected every aspect of the rejection, exploring not just its immediate consequences, but also the larger implications it carried for both Meghan Markle and the British monarchy. What had initially seemed like a simple denial of a request for royal recognition had now transformed into a defining moment that exposed the growing chasm between the Sussexes and the institution they had left behind. One of the most significant aspects of the fallout was the perception that the rejection had been a calculated move designed to permanently sever Meghan's ties to the monarchy. While official palace sources framed the decision as one rooted in tradition and protocol, many observers believed there was a deeper, more personal motive at play. For years, the royal family had struggled to manage the ongoing controversies surrounding Meghan and Harry, and some saw this move as an effort to ensure that the Sussexes would no longer have any lingering claims to royal privileges. By denying Meghan's request, Charles had drawn a clear boundary, one that signaled an unwillingness to allow any blurred lines when it came to the status of those who had stepped away from their duties. This development was particularly significant because it set a precedent for how future royal disputes would be handled. In the past, there had been instances where royals who distanced themselves from the monarchy were still granted certain allowances. For example, Prince Andrew, despite his fall from grace, had retained certain privileges even after stepping back from public life. However, the Sussexes had been treated differently. The rejection of Meghan's title request made it clear that their break from the royal family was absolute, leaving no room for partial reintegration or selective engagement with the institution. As the dust settled, reactions from Meghan and Harry's inner circle began to emerge. While the couple had remained publicly silent, sources close to them suggested that they were deeply frustrated by the rejection. Meghan, in particular, was said to have felt personally slighted, believing that the decision was not just about upholding tradition, but also about reinforcing her exclusion from the royal family. Reports indicated that she had expected some form of compromise, a middle ground that would allow her to retain a degree of recognition without fully reinstating her royal status. Instead, she had been met with a firm and final denial, an outcome that reportedly left her feeling betrayed. Harry's reaction was equally complex. While he had long been vocal about his grievances with the royal family, he had also expressed a desire for reconciliation on multiple occasions. The outright rejection of Meghan's request further strained his already fragile relationship with his father and brother. Insiders suggested that Harry had hoped for a more diplomatic resolution, one that would have allowed for continued dialogue rather than a decisive ruling that left no room for negotiation. With this latest development, it became clear that any potential reconciliation between Harry and his family was more distant than ever. Meanwhile, in royal circles, the decision was widely viewed as a necessary step in protecting the integrity of the monarchy. Senior palace aides emphasized that the ruling was not intended to be a personal attack on Meghan, but rather a reaffirmation of the principles that governed the royal institution. Allowing her to reclaim a title would have sent the wrong message, they argued, creating an expectation that individuals could leave the monarchy and return whenever it suited them. By taking a firm stance, King Charles ensured that there would be no ambiguity about what it meant to be a working royal. However, not everyone within the royal establishment was entirely comfortable with the decision. Some insiders expressed concern that the rejection might have unintended consequences, particularly in terms of public perception. While many in the United Kingdom supported Charles's decision, there were growing divisions among younger generations who questioned whether the monarchy was becoming too rigid in its approach. The handling of Meghan and Harry's departure had already sparked debates about whether the institution needed to modernize, and this latest move only intensified those discussions. Public reactions continued to be deeply divided. In the British press, the decision was largely framed as a necessary assertion of royal authority. Many newspapers praised Charles for taking a strong stance, with some commentators arguing that the move demonstrated that the monarchy was no longer willing to cater to the Sussexes' demands. The narrative that emerged was one of strength and discipline, a king who was willing to uphold the traditions of the monarchy despite external pressures. In contrast, international media, particularly in the United States, took a more critical view. Some American commentators saw the decision as an unnecessary escalation, one that further alienated Meghan and Harry at a time when reconciliation could have been a more strategic approach. Others framed it as yet another example of the British monarchy's reluctance to evolve, pointing to the decision as evidence that the institution remained resistant to change. This divide in coverage reflected broader cultural differences in how the Sussexes were perceived. While they were viewed with skepticism in certain British circles, they retained significant support among American audiences who saw them as victims of an outdated system. Beyond the immediate media frenzy, the decision had long-term implications for Meghan and Harry's future. With their royal ties now firmly severed, they faced the challenge of maintaining their influence and relevance without the titles and formal recognition they had once possessed. While they had built a successful brand around their status as former royals, the rejection of Meghan's request made it clear that they could no longer rely on any lingering association with the monarchy to bolster their public image. This reality forced the Sussexes to reassess their strategy. In the wake of the decision, industry insiders speculated about what their next moves might be. Would they attempt to reshape their public narrative, focusing more on their philanthropic and media ventures rather than their royal connections? Or would they choose to directly address the rejection, potentially reigniting tensions with the monarchy through another round of public disclosures? The answer to this question would determine how they navigated the next phase of their careers. Meanwhile, within the royal family, attention turned to the broader implications of Charles's ruling. The decision had not only addressed the issue of Meghan's request, but had also set a standard for how similar situations would be handled in the future. Moving forward, the monarchy was likely to adopt a more formalized approach to dealing with family members who chose to step away from their duties. This could mean stricter guidelines about who could retain royal titles, as well as clearer distinctions between working and non-working members of the family. As the weeks went by, the intensity of the media coverage began to subside, but the underlying tensions remained. The rejection of Meghan's request had solidified a narrative that would shape the future of the monarchy for years to come. For Charles, it was a demonstration of leadership and authority, a message that the institution would not be dictated by public opinion or external pressures. For Meghan and Harry, it was a moment of reckoning, one that forced them to confront the reality that their royal past was now truly behind them. Yet, despite the finality of the decision, one question lingered. Was this truly the end of the battle, or was it merely the beginning of a new phase in the ongoing struggle between the Sussexes and the monarchy? Given their history, it seemed unlikely that Meghan and Harry would simply fade into the background. Whether through media appearances, new projects, or subtle public statements, the topic of their place within the royal family was bound to resurface. And when it did, the world would once again be watching, eager to see how the next chapter in this complex and highly publicized saga would unfold. The fallout from King Charles's firm stance against Meghan Markle's title request was far from over. While the initial wave of media coverage had gradually subsided, the ramifications of this decision were still unfolding behind the scenes. What had initially seemed like a straightforward matter of royal protocol had now cemented itself as one of the defining moments of Charles's reign, altering not only the relationship between the monarchy and the Sussexes, but also shaping public perception of the royal family's future. For Meghan and Harry, the rejection had brought with it an undeniable sense of finality. It was no longer just about being distanced from the monarchy. It was about being permanently locked out of any possibility of reintegration. This reality forced them to confront the challenge of redefining their public identities without the royal association they had once leaned on. In their post-royal life, they had managed to sustain a presence in the media, but questions now arose about whether they could maintain their level of influence in the long term. One of the biggest concerns within the Sussex camp was how this decision would impact their marketability. Their initial appeal had been built on their unique position as insiders who had walked away from the monarchy. This status had granted them lucrative deals with Netflix, Spotify, and publishing houses eager to capitalize on their unprecedented perspective. But now, with Meghan's title request firmly denied and their royal connections reduced to almost nothing, the question arose. Would they still be able to command the same level of attention and financial opportunities? This uncertainty was compounded by the mixed reception of their recent ventures. While Harry's memoir had achieved commercial success, some of their other projects had struggled to gain traction. Meghan's Spotify podcast had ended after just one season, and there were increasing whispers about whether their Netflix deal would yield the level of impact initially anticipated. With their official ties to the monarchy severed, their challenge now was to prove that they could build a sustainable brand independent of their past titles. Behind the scenes, their team was reportedly working on a strategy to pivot away from royal controversies and focus more on their philanthropic work and business endeavors. Meghan, in particular, was said to be considering new ways to expand her public persona beyond the narrative of royal estrangement. Whether this meant launching new projects, partnering with influential figures outside the royal sphere, or delving further into activism remained to be seen. However, the underlying challenge remained. Without the prestige of their royal status, they would have to work harder to maintain their relevance in an industry driven by exclusivity and recognition. Meanwhile, within the palace, King Charles's decision was being analyzed from multiple angles. While the official stance remained that the rejection was a matter of protocol, there was an acknowledgement that it had also sent a broader message about the monarchy's direction under his leadership. The decision to firmly deny Meghan's request had not only reinforced the traditional structure of the institution, but had also signaled that Charles was willing to take decisive action when it came to protecting the integrity of the royal family. This approach was seen as a necessary adjustment in response to the evolving challenges the monarchy faced in the modern world. Over the years, there had been growing debates about the relevance of the royal family in contemporary society, particularly among younger generations who viewed the institution as outdated. By taking a firm stance on issues like royal titles and privileges, Charles was making it clear that his reign would be defined by structure and discipline rather than flexibility and compromise. However, this approach was not without risks. While the decision had been well received by traditional royal supporters, there was still the question of how it would impact the monarchy's image in the long run. Some analysts warned that by shutting Meghan out so definitively, the royal family had inadvertently given her and Harry more ammunition to continue shaping their narrative as outsiders who had been unfairly treated. The challenge now was ensuring that this decision did not become a rallying point for those who already viewed the monarchy as resistant to progress. At the same time, the royal family had to navigate the delicate balance of maintaining public trust while enforcing its principles. The monarchy had long relied on a careful blend of tradition and adaptation, ensuring that it remained relevant without compromising its core values. Charles's ruling on Meghan's title request was a statement that there would be no room for exceptions, but it also highlighted the growing divide between the institution and a segment of the public that had grown sympathetic to the Sussexes' struggles. As time passed, the focus began to shift toward the long-term consequences of this moment. The decision had not just closed a door for Meghan, it had also set a precedent for how the royal family would handle similar situations in the future. This was particularly significant as discussions about the monarchy's future structure continued to gain traction. Charles had already hinted at his vision for a streamlined royal family, and the handling of the Sussex issue was a clear indication of what that vision entailed. For Prince William, this development carried even greater weight. As the future king, he had a vested interest in ensuring that the monarchy remained strong and stable. The decision to deny Meghan's request aligned with his own understanding of royal duty and responsibility, reinforcing the idea that the institution must be upheld by those who actively serve it. William had long been wary of the complications that arose from blurred lines between working and non-working royals, and this moment reaffirmed his belief that clear distinctions needed to be maintained. Yet, despite the firm stance taken by the palace, there was an underlying awareness that the Sussexes were unlikely to disappear from public discourse. Meghan and Harry had demonstrated time and time again that they were adept at staying in the spotlight, whether through strategic interviews, media appearances, or new ventures. The challenge now was how the royal family would continue to manage the ongoing scrutiny that came with their presence. As the months went on, the conversation around Meghan's title rejection gradually faded from the headlines, but its impact lingered. The decision had reinforced the monarchy's authority while simultaneously deepening the divide between the royal family and the Sussexes. Whether this would ultimately strengthen or weaken the institution remained to be seen, but one thing was clear: the boundaries had been set, and there would be no turning back. For Meghan and Harry, this moment was a stark reminder that their royal past was now truly behind them. How they chose to navigate the next chapter of their lives would determine whether they could build a legacy beyond the titles they had sought to reclaim. Whether they embraced their independence fully or continued to challenge the monarchy's decisions, their future remained uncertain, but one undeniable fact had emerged. King Charles had made his decision, and the monarchy had moved on. As the dust settled on King Charles's firm rejection of Meghan Markle's title request, the royal family turned its attention to maintaining stability and reinforcing the principles that had guided the monarchy for centuries. However, the decision had sent ripples far beyond Buckingham Palace. It had reshaped public perception, deepened the divide between the monarchy and the Sussexes, and signaled a new era in how the institution would handle challenges from former members. One of the key aspects of the fallout was how the decision impacted the internal dynamics of the royal family. While Charles had been at the center of the ruling, it was evident that Prince William had played a crucial role in shaping the outcome. William had long been an advocate for maintaining the monarchy's integrity and had reportedly been one of the strongest voices against any form of concession to Meghan's request. His perspective was rooted in his understanding of what it meant to be a working royal. He had witnessed firsthand the weight of responsibility that came with his position and saw no justification for granting privileges to individuals who had chosen to step away. William's stance was not simply about Meghan's request in isolation. It was about ensuring that no precedent was set for future generations. He was acutely aware that as his own children grew older, they would face their own unique challenges in navigating royal expectations. Allowing Meghan to reclaim her title could have created complications down the line, opening the door for other royals to demand selective recognition without fulfilling their obligations. By standing firmly against it, William reinforced the notion that royal titles were not mere symbols but reflections of duty and service. Queen Camilla, too, had reportedly supported Charles's decision, albeit with a different perspective. While she was known for maintaining a more diplomatic approach to royal matters, she understood that Meghan's request was not just about titles, but about influence. The monarchy had weathered countless challenges over the years, and Camilla recognized the importance of drawing clear lines to prevent the institution from becoming a tool for individual ambitions. She had spent decades earning her place within the royal family, enduring intense public scrutiny, and eventually gaining widespread acceptance. From her viewpoint, Meghan had walked away from the monarchy and had no justification for expecting continued privileges. Despite these internal discussions, the official response from the royal family remained measured. The palace did not issue any formal statements beyond the initial reports that confirmed Meghan's request had been denied. This approach was consistent with the monarchy's long-standing policy of maintaining a dignified silence in the face of controversy. However, behind closed doors, there was an awareness that Meghan and Harry could still retaliate in their own way. The Sussexes had proven time and again that they were not afraid to challenge the monarchy publicly. Their high-profile interviews, documentary projects, and Harry's memoir had all contained allegations and criticisms aimed at the institution. The palace had carefully weathered those storms, choosing to remain largely silent in response to the claims made. But now, with the rejection of Meghan's title request fresh in the public eye, there was speculation about whether the Sussexes would escalate their public campaign against the royal family. In the weeks following the decision, there was a noticeable shift in the way Meghan and Harry positioned themselves in the media. While they did not directly address the rejection, subtle indications of their displeasure began to surface. Reports emerged suggesting that Meghan had been deeply hurt by the ruling and that she felt once again ostracized by the royal family. Some insiders claimed that she was considering a new wave of media engagements to discuss her experiences, though no concrete plans had been announced. Harry, meanwhile, was reportedly struggling with the implications of the rejection on a personal level. While he had openly criticized the institution in the past, there had always been a lingering sense that he wished to maintain some form of connection with his family. The rejection of Meghan's title request had made it clear that any path toward reconciliation was now more distant than ever. Some of his close associates suggested that he was torn between wanting to respond forcefully and recognizing that further public attacks on the monarchy could damage his credibility. Meanwhile, public reaction to the decision continued to evolve. Among traditional royal supporters, Charles's ruling was seen as a firm but necessary step in maintaining the integrity of the monarchy. Many viewed it as a long-overdue assertion of authority, demonstrating that the institution would not allow itself to be undermined by external pressures. Royal commentators praised the move, arguing that it reinforced the idea that titles were earned through service rather than granted as a means of maintaining public relevance. However, among Meghan's supporters, the decision was framed as another example of her being treated unfairly. Social media platforms were flooded with discussions about the ruling, with many questioning why the royal family had taken such a hardline approach. Some argued that the rejection was fueled by personal biases rather than a strict adherence to royal protocol. These debates reignited broader conversations about the monarchy's approach to modernity, with some voices calling for reforms that would make the institution more inclusive and adaptable to contemporary expectations. Beyond the immediate reactions, the long-term consequences of the decision began to take shape. Meghan and Harry's position in the public eye was at a crossroads. With their royal ties further weakened, they faced the challenge of proving that they could remain influential figures without the backing of the monarchy. This meant focusing on their independent projects, strengthening their philanthropic efforts, and finding new ways to engage with the public. Some industry experts speculated that the Sussexes might attempt to pivot their brand toward a more Hollywood-oriented approach, leveraging Meghan's background in entertainment to establish a stronger presence in the media industry. Others believed that they would double down on their humanitarian work, positioning themselves as global activists rather than former royals. Regardless of the direction they chose, one thing was clear: their future success would now depend entirely on their ability to build a brand that did not rely on their royal past. For the monarchy, The rejection of Meghan's request was a defining moment in how it handled challenges from within. It was a statement that the institution would not be dictated by public figures who sought to use their royal connections selectively. It also reinforced the idea that the monarchy was willing to make difficult decisions to protect its stability, even at the risk of controversy. As time passed, the world watched to see how both sides would navigate the aftermath of this decision. Would Meghan and Harry find a way to move forward without reigniting tensions with the royal family? Would Charles's ruling stand as a turning point in how the monarchy handled future challenges? The answers remained uncertain, but one undeniable fact had emerged. This was a moment that had reshaped the relationship between the Sussexes and the royal family in a way that would not easily be undone. The rejection of Meghan's title request was not just about names or formalities. It was about power, influence, and the future of the monarchy. It had exposed the complexities of royal tradition, the personal dynamics at play, and the evolving role of the institution in a rapidly changing world. Whether this moment marked the end of the Sussexes' connection to the monarchy or the beginning of a new chapter in their ongoing battle for recognition, one thing was clear: the decision had left a lasting impact, one that would be felt for years to come. The rejection of Meghan Markle's title request had reverberated across the world, and while the initial media frenzy had started to cool, the consequences of King Charles's decision were still unfolding. The monarchy had drawn a firm line, reinforcing the idea that royal titles were not just decorative labels, but symbols of duty and service. Yet, this ruling had created a new set of challenges for both the Sussexes and the royal family, raising critical questions about how each side would navigate the road ahead. For Meghan and Harry, the implications of this decision extended far beyond personal disappointment. In many ways, their entire public persona had been shaped by their royal connections. While they had distanced themselves from the monarchy, their titles and heritage had remained key selling points in their media ventures. The loss of any potential reinstatement of Meghan's royal status meant they would have to shift their strategy to ensure their influence remained intact. One of the most immediate effects of the rejection was on their business dealings. Since leaving their official royal roles, Meghan and Harry had secured multi-million-dollar contracts with major platforms such as Netflix and Spotify. These deals were largely predicated on their unique position as insiders who had chosen to step away from the monarchy. However, with Meghan's request denied, it became clear that they could no longer rely on their royal status as a significant part of their appeal. Industry experts began speculating on how this would impact their marketability. Would streaming platforms and publishing houses still see them as valuable figures without their royal associations? The answer was complex. While there was still interest in their personal stories and activism, their status as former royals had been a crucial factor in their initial success. Now, with that connection further weakened, they would need to prove they could maintain relevance on their own terms. Meghan, in particular, was reportedly exploring new avenues for her career. While she had previously focused on projects related to social issues and female empowerment, there were discussions about whether she would return to acting or delve deeper into the world of high-profile media production. Some sources suggested that she was considering launching a new lifestyle brand, similar to the ventures pursued by other celebrities who had transitioned from entertainment into business. However, the challenge remained. How would she position herself in a way that distinguished her from countless other public figures with similar ambitions? For Harry, the situation was more complicated. Unlike Meghan, who had built a career outside of the royal family before their marriage, his entire life had been shaped by his royal identity. With Meghan's request denied and the palace making it clear that their royal ties were not going to be reinstated, Harry was facing the reality that he was no longer part of the institution that had defined him since birth. This raised difficult questions about his long-term role in the public sphere. Would he continue to write books and give interviews about his royal past? Or would he try to carve out a new path independent of his family's legacy? Behind the scenes, there were indications that the Sussexes were struggling to decide on their next moves. Some of their advisors reportedly urged them to pivot away from discussions about the monarchy and focus instead on their philanthropic efforts and independent projects. However, there was also the lingering possibility that they might address the rejection in some form, whether through a carefully crafted public statement or another high-profile interview. Meanwhile, within the royal family, The decision had reaffirmed the monarchy's position on non-working royals and the limits of their privileges. King Charles's ruling had not only denied Meghan's request, but had also sent a clear message about the direction he intended to take as monarch. He was leading with a philosophy of discipline and tradition, reinforcing the idea that royal status was earned through service rather than entitlement. The rejection of Meghan's request also had broader implications for how the monarchy would handle future challenges. Over the years, there had been debates about whether the institution needed to modernize to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. However, Charles's decision suggested that he was committed to maintaining the core principles of the monarchy rather than bending to external pressures. This stance resonated with traditionalists who believed that the royal family should remain firmly rooted in its historical values. Yet, the firm stance also carried risks. While it had strengthened the monarchy's position in the short term, it had also deepened the divide between the royal family and the Sussexes. This raised questions about how future royal controversies would be managed. Would the monarchy continue to take a hardline approach, or would there come a time when reconciliation became necessary for the sake of preserving unity? Prince William, for his part, was reportedly one of the strongest supporters of his father's decision. He had long been wary of the complications caused by Meghan and Harry's departure from the royal family, and saw the rejection as a necessary step in protecting the monarchy's credibility. He understood that as the future king, he would be responsible for upholding the integrity of the institution, and allowing exceptions for former royals could set a precedent that weakened its authority. Among the British public, reactions to the decision remained divided along familiar lines. Supporters of the monarchy praised Charles for taking a decisive stance, arguing that it reinforced the idea that royal titles carried responsibility and were not simply ornamental. On the other hand, critics of the monarchy saw it as another example of the institution's unwillingness to evolve. They argued that by rejecting Meghan's request, the royal family had once again positioned itself as an exclusive club rather than a modern institution that could adapt to changing social expectations. In the United States, where Meghan and Harry had established their new life, the response was equally mixed. While some commentators expressed sympathy for Meghan, others questioned whether she had overestimated her influence in the royal hierarchy. There was also a growing sense among certain circles that the Sussexes needed to move beyond their ongoing tensions with the royal family if they wanted to maintain their credibility. As the weeks passed, the intensity of the controversy began to fade, but its consequences remained. The Sussexes were now faced with the reality that they were no longer just former royals who had stepped away. They were individuals who had been definitively cut off from any lingering claims to their former status. This marked a turning point in their relationship with the monarchy, forcing them to fully embrace their independent identities. For King Charles, the decision had reinforced his authority and set a precedent for how similar issues would be handled in the future. By denying Meghan's request, he had made it clear that the monarchy would not be dictated by external influences or personal grievances. It was a defining moment that underscored the institution's commitment to tradition, even in the face of controversy. Yet, despite the apparent finality of the decision, there was a lingering sense that the story was not truly over. The Sussexes had built their brand on their connection to the royal family, and it was unlikely that they would completely sever ties with the narrative that had defined them for years. Whether through new projects, media appearances, or carefully worded statements, the topic of their relationship with the monarchy would inevitably resurface. As the world watched, the question remained, was this the end of the conflict, or was it simply another chapter in an ongoing saga? With both sides firmly entrenched in their positions, it seemed unlikely that reconciliation would happen anytime soon. But in the ever-evolving world of royal dynamics, nothing was ever truly final. And with Meghan and Harry still commanding global attention, the next move in this high-stakes game of power and perception was sure to come sooner rather than later. The rejection of Meghan Markle's title request had shifted the landscape of the royal family's public relations, creating a moment of reckoning that neither side could ignore. While the decision had been framed as a matter of protocol, it had far-reaching consequences that would shape the Sussexes' trajectory and the monarchy's future. What followed was a series of strategic moves, carefully calculated reactions, and a lingering uncertainty about where this fractured relationship would lead next. In Montecito, the Sussexes faced the reality that their royal ties had been further weakened, if not severed entirely. Although they had made the choice to step away from their senior roles years earlier, there had always been an air of ambiguity surrounding their relationship with the royal family. That ambiguity had allowed them to maintain a certain level of prestige, even as they distanced themselves from the institution. Now, with King Charles's ruling, that ambiguity was gone. They were no longer seen as members of the royal family in any functional capacity, but rather as outsiders with no official standing. This shift placed them at a crossroads. Up until this point, their public image had been built on a delicate balance of royal proximity and independence. They had leveraged their connections to the monarchy in interviews, book deals, and media projects, while simultaneously positioning themselves as free agents who had broken away from the constraints of royal life. With Meghan's request officially denied, that balancing act became more difficult. If they continued to speak about their experiences with the royal family, they risked being seen as fixated on the past rather than forging a new future. If they ignored the decision altogether, they risked fading into irrelevance. In the immediate aftermath, Meghan and Harry remained publicly silent, but behind the scenes, discussions were taking place about their next steps. Some close to the couple suggested that Meghan was deeply hurt by the ruling and had expected a different outcome. Sources indicated that she believed the rejection was about more than just royal tradition. It was about reinforcing the divide between her and the institution. While she had previously expressed a desire to move on from the drama surrounding her royal exit, this latest setback had reignited old wounds. Harry, meanwhile, found himself caught between two worlds. He had long been vocal about his grievances with the monarchy, but he had also made it clear that he still valued his relationship with certain members of his family, particularly his father and brother. This decision only made that reconciliation more difficult. With Charles taking a firm stance against any reinstatement of Meghan's title, Harry faced the reality that his future relationship with the monarchy was now more distant than ever. Some reports suggested that he had been more open to a potential compromise, hoping for a resolution that would allow his wife to maintain some level of recognition without a full return to royal life. However, Charles's ruling had left no room for such a middle ground. As speculation about their next move grew, media outlets began analyzing how this decision would affect their brand. In the years since their departure, the Sussexes had built a business empire based on their personal story, a story that had been deeply intertwined with their royal past. From Netflix documentaries to exclusive interviews, much of their appeal stemmed from their ability to provide an inside look into the institution. With the rejection of Meghan's title request, that connection had been further diminished. While they still held the titles of Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the rejection had symbolically marked the final break between them and the crown. Industry experts questioned whether this would make them less appealing to major media platforms. Would publishers still be eager to sign deals with them if their royal ties no longer carried weight? Would streaming services continue to invest in their projects if the public lost interest in their ongoing rift with the monarchy? The answer was unclear. While there was still curiosity about their lives, the question remained whether they could sustain that interest without the constant backdrop of royal drama. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, the monarchy remained focused on consolidating its authority. King Charles's decision had sent a clear message, not just to Meghan and Harry, but to anyone who might consider challenging the institution's traditions in the future. It reinforced the idea that the monarchy was not an entity that could be molded to fit individual desires. By denying Meghan's request, Charles had affirmed that titles and privileges came with obligations, and those who chose to step away could not selectively reclaim them when convenient. For Prince William, this decision was seen as a necessary step in protecting the monarchy's long-term stability. He had long been wary of the impact that his brother's departure had on the institution, and he recognized the importance of drawing clear boundaries. While he had once been close to Harry, the events of the past few years had created an undeniable rift between them. William's focus was now on ensuring that the monarchy remained strong for future generations, and that meant upholding rules that prevented blurred lines between working and non-working royals. Within the palace, advisors worked to ensure that the narrative around the decision remained focused on tradition rather than personal conflict. The messaging was clear: This was not about punishing Meghan, but about maintaining the integrity of the royal institution. By framing the decision this way, the palace aimed to prevent further controversy and limit any perception that this was a personal vendetta against the Sussexes. However, despite this careful positioning, there were those who believed that the ruling had been influenced by deeper tensions between Meghan and the royal family. Public reaction continued to be divided. In the United Kingdom, royal supporters largely backed the decision, viewing it as a necessary assertion of control. Many saw it as a way to reaffirm that the monarchy was not an organization that could be influenced by personal appeals or public pressure. Others, however, felt that the decision reflected a rigidity that might hurt the monarchy's reputation in the long run. They argued that by taking such a firm stance, Charles had alienated a younger generation that had become increasingly disillusioned with the institution. In the United States, the reaction was more mixed. While some saw the decision as an expected outcome, others viewed it as another example of the monarchy's unwillingness to modernize. Meghan had cultivated a strong support base in America, particularly among those who admired her advocacy for women's rights and racial equality. For these supporters, the rejection was seen as yet another instance of her being unfairly sidelined. However, there was also a growing sentiment that the Sussexes needed to shift their focus away from royal disputes if they wanted to sustain their influence. As time passed, the impact of the decision became clearer. Meghan and Harry's future would now be shaped by how they adapted to this new reality. Would they find success outside of the royal narrative, or would they continue to challenge the monarchy's decisions? Would they build a lasting legacy based on their independent ventures, or would they struggle to maintain relevance without the royal connection that had defined them for so long? For the monarchy, the ruling had set a precedent for how future disputes would be handled. Charles had demonstrated that he was willing to take a firm approach when it came to upholding the institution's traditions. Whether this would ultimately strengthen or weaken the monarchy remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: this decision had permanently altered the relationship between the Sussexes and the royal family. In the end, this was more than just a dispute over a title. It was a moment that symbolized the shifting power dynamics between the old world of monarchy and the modern realities of celebrity influence. Whether this would be the final chapter in the ongoing saga or just another turning point remained unknown. But as history had shown time and time again, when it came to the royal family, nothing was ever truly settled.